Good afternoon. Welcome to another episode of Depolarize, or Despolariza in Portuguese. Today we're going to talk about objectivism, but before I introduce you to our guest today, I want to thank our new supporters, Joana Ferreira, Rui Veloso, Graça Lopes, Sara Martins, Bárbara de Barros, Dionísio Souza, André Costa, Ana Campos, Toninho Araújo, Joana Souza, and Maria Sobral. Thank you very much for your support. If you're interested in becoming part of this community, there'll be a link somewhere around me, another one in the description. And without further ado, let me introduce you to our guest today. Yaron Brook is an Israeli-American objectivist writer. He's the current chairman of the board at the Ayn Rand Institute, where he was executive director from 2000 to 2017. Prior to joining the Ayn Rand Institute, he was finance professor at Santa Clara University in California, where he taught for 7 years, and he's also served in the Israeli intelligence services. Welcome, Yaron.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
First question, how do you exactly say Yaron? How do you pronounce it?
In Hebrew, you say Yaron.
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 Okay. That's what I thought, but on other podcasts, I heard people say Yaron.
People say it in a wide variety of ways, and since I spent a lot of my time outside of Israel, I can't hear it anymore. So I'm used to everybody mispronouncing my name, and I don't really care that much.
Thank you for accepting the invitation.
Oh, my pleasure.
And so normally the podcast starts with always with the same question, which is about your social and genetic lottery, because I believe that our genes and the parents that ended up becoming our parents have a very big influence on who we become. So what was your social and genetic lottery?
I was born to Ashkenazi Jewish parents, so that gives you a variety of different genetic, in the genetic lottery, it gives you a variety of different things. It means you're susceptible to a lot of diseases nobody else is susceptible to. That's part of the genetic lottery, but it also, on average, we're supposed to be really, really smart. But that's on average, so who knows, as individuals. Father's a doctor. My mother was a housewife most of her life. If you go back enough generations, I come from a long line of rabbis, going back to Lithuania, to the Jewish community in Lithuania. In terms of social, I grew up in Israel. I was born in Israel. As I said, my father was a doctor. In those days in Israel, and to some extent today, doctors, while respected and everything, don't make any money. So you kind of lower middle class ultimately is what you achieve. Maybe middle class is what you achieve. We grew up pretty poor, not poor, but as compared to how people live today, and spent a lot of time outside of Israel. So as a kid, as my dad specialized as a physician, we spent 2.5 years in London. We spent 2 years in Boston. And then even within Israel, I was born in Jerusalem, but we spent some time in the southern tip of Israel, a place called Eilat, and also in the north of Israel, in Haifa, where I spent most of my time.
Any siblings?
3 other siblings. So I have one brother and 2 sisters. A big gap between the brothers and sisters. 10 year. My parents took a 10-year break from having kids. But yeah, there are 4 of us. Okay,
you were the last one.
No, I'm the oldest.
Oh, you're the oldest one. Okay.
Definitely the oldest.
And so at one fateful day when you were 16, somebody handed you a book, right? How did that happen?
Yeah, so as I was a typical Israeli 16-year-old, I think, in those days. This is in the 1970s. I was a socialist. I was a statist. I was a committed altruist. We'll talk about altruism later. I was very much a nationalist, a Jewish nationalist. I very much believed in, very much a Zionist.
So you're a national socialist, basically.
There's a sense in which, yes. I mean, not that kind of national socialist, but there's a sense in which all nationalists and all socialists are ultimately national socialists. Mm-hmm. The original socialists were internationalists. What do we call them today? Globalists, right? And we don't like globalists anymore. So almost all socialists are nationalists, and almost all nationalists. You find me a nationalist out there who's not a socialist when it comes to economic policy. They all are. So it's very hard to de-link socialism from nationalism. Very difficult. Because it's both statism and the primacy of the state at the end of the day. And yes, I believed in the primacy of the state in that sense. And, in Israel, in those days, you grew up, it was all about the state. It was all about the survival of the Jewish people. It was all about teaching kids that their job in life was the preservation of the Jewish people. And therefore, you could say, I like to say, I was waiting for the grenade on which to jump, to sacrifice my life for the greater good of whatever.
Okay.
Right? So I was a pretty committed non-objectivist, if you will.
How were these ideas fed to you? Was it more through school or more through parents, or it was everywhere?
It's everywhere, right? I mean,
Okay.
If you think about the songs that I grew up with, the songs about heroic soldiers fighting for a heroic cause, the stories about the same thing, the politics about it. There was only one political party that basically had ruled Israel from the founding until I read Atlas Shrugged, and then everything changed. And that was the Labor Party. So socialism was everywhere. The largest employer in Israel, in those days was the workers' union. So the
Wow.
union owned the means of production. So this was in the air. It was in all our education. It was from our parents. It was really but school, songs, stories. It was the culture. The culture's changed quite a bit in Israel since then, but that's the culture that I grew up in. And then I'm arguing with a friend of mine who I'd get together periodically, and we talk about different ideas. And he started spouting these pro-market, pro-capitalist ideas, and I said, basically, where are you getting this nonsense from? And he said, you have to read this book. And he handed me a copy of Atlas Shrugged. And so I took Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand, which everybody should read, by the way. And I read it. I read it very slowly because I really, really disagreed with it, right? So these were new ideas. And I argued with them because they did not seem right to me. So I argued with them. I'd get frustrated. I'd yell at Ayn Rand. I'd throw the book against the wall. And by the end of the book, I was convinced she was right. I had been wrong. Basically, most of the ideas I believed in, most of the abstract ideas I believed in were wrong. And much of my value system, much of the values I had held as most important in my life were wrong. And that process of, first of all, discovering that and then unwinding and changing your values is not a simple, easy process.
Yeah, because identity, like identifying with ideas, makes you feel like an attack upon the ideas, an attack upon your ego or yourself. So it's very hard to overcome that kind of phenomenon.
Yeah, but there's a reason for that to a large extent. I mean, you talk about the fact that you're shaped by your genes and you're shaped by your environment, but I would argue you're shaped by your choices and you're shaped by your ideas because your ideas guide much of your choices. So to a large extent, your character, who you are, how you engage with life and reality is going to be shaped by the ideas that you have. So because of that, we hold those ideas pretty sacred because they shape much of how we're going to live our lives. So giving up these deeply entrenched ideas and although I was 16, so it would have been much harder if I'd been 25 or if I'd been 40. At 16, it's relatively easy to shed your ideas and replace them with others because you're less committed to them. I mean, you've barely been conscious. So
what was the main idea that you felt like, okay, this really has changed? Like, what was the moral value change that you think was the strongest one?
Yeah, so the strongest, there's no question what the strongest one was, and that is, who should you live for, right? That to me was the biggest issue. I remember having thought to myself before I read Ayn Rand, why should I sacrifice to other people? Why is the happiness of other people more important than mine? Why is the Jewish people or whatever, Israel or whatever, the state, more important than me? And I dismissed it and said, well, what option is there? I mean, that's morality. That's what it is. And Ayn Rand comes in and says, well, there is an option. And there is an alternative. You don't have to sacrifice your life. Indeed, you shouldn't. Your life is yours. There is a morality of living your life for yourself. That is what morality really is supposed to teach you how to do. How should I live my life so I can live the best life that I can live? That I can, flourish, that I can be successful, that I can prosper as an individual. My life does not belong to anybody. It doesn't belong to the state. It doesn't belong to people I genetically am associated with. It doesn't belong to the proletarian. It doesn't belong to any particular group. It belongs to me, and I get to make choices about that. And then I need to find a way to live the best life that I can live for me. So that was a revolution. That shattered my universe, and it required me to really rethink my values, my whole hierarchy of values, my whole system of values. Everything I loved and cherished had to be rethought.
Okay, so basically, you became what could be called an ethical selfish man or egoist. You call
Yes.
ethical egoism.
So I'd call ethical egoism or a rational self-interest, an ethics of rational self-interest. So the question is, of course, okay, so I should live for myself. Well, how do you do that? What are the principles? What's guiding you? And for Ayn Rand, it's quite clear what must guide you is the thing that makes you human. What is it that makes you human? What makes us human is our reason. What makes it human is our capacity to think. It's our capacity to be rational.
I think it's more than that, though.
Well, I think everything else that you would attribute to it ultimately derives from that. There's nothing else.
You think like writing a symphony or painting a picture is purely rational?
Absolutely. It's not rational in the sense that it's mathematical or it's because we have a very narrow view of rationality, unfortunately, which is that it has to be kind of a deductive logic, kind of a deduction. But what does rationality actually mean? Rationality means adherence to reality. It means based on facts. It means based on what actually exists. And I think you cannot write a symphony unless you've studied music seriously, unless you know music, you know what music does, you know how music functions. If you think about a Beethoven symphony, which he wrote, by the way, when he was deaf, right? He had to know what every instrument does, how every instrument interacts with another instrument, how if he has the trumpets do one thing, how that interacts with the violins doing another thing. I can't think of a more rational activity than that. Now, it comes out not as a deduction, it comes out as a flow, but that's a consequence of the fact that he has internalized this massive quantity of information, knowledge, which he has had to acquire through reason. That is through the use of his senses and through a process of abstracting the essentials from that and an understanding about all these relationships. You don't get that from instinct. You don't get that from emotion. You don't get that from anywhere. You get it from understanding and knowledge.
No, but when you say knowledge, so you defined reason as something as basically you said it's what life is, or it's how you're defining it almost as if it's how your brain works. But part of the knowledge Beethoven had to make that work comes from things he felt.
Sure.
When listening to certain sequences of notes.
Sure.
So emotion is there and instinct is there.
I'm not
within your reason.
We could talk about instinct. I think let's put instinct aside for a minute.
Emotion.
But emotion is absolutely there. Emotion is super crucial. And then the question is, are your emotions consistent with your rational values, with your reasoning faculty, with your rationality, or are they contradicting to them? And, much of our mental illness maybe is associated with the fact that our emotions are sometimes contradicting what they should be. So emotions, though, are consequences. Emotions are not primaries. Emotions come from conclusions we've already come to. So if I come to a conclusion about, I don't know, dogs will bite me, right? I came to that conclusion, I think, when I was a little boy, right? A dog must have, jumped on me or something. And therefore, that creates an emotion. Every time I see a dog, I feel fear because I came to the conclusion of dogs bite, and I don't want to be bitten, but bite is pain. So you could carry that emotion into your adulthood, and it's irrational because dogs don't generally bite. So, and then what you work on it, right? You can this is what psychology should be doing, right? Psychotherapy should be involved in, is you come to understand where the emotion comes from or what kind of conclusions would lead to the emotion, and you can undo that emotion. Most of our emotions we can undo. I mean, we know this. Everybody knows this, right? You fall in love. You're madly in love with this woman, and then you discover something horrible about her.
But what
she
if
lies to you.
What if you still love her?
Well, it takes the emotion a while to go away, but it will go away. Unless you succumb to it and you give into it and you ignore reality and you ignore your conclusions, and then you'll suffer the consequences of being involved with a woman who lies to you. But to the extent that you discover the lie and you say, this is unacceptable, you might still feel the tug of love, but over time that will go away. We've all been in love and fallen out of love, right? So we know that emotions can change. Emotions can change based on new facts. We don't like this woman anymore. We stop loving her. Our conclusions are what lead to our emotions. And when we change the conclusions, it might take a little while. Our emotions change. I give you again a personal example. I used to get teary-eyed every time the Israeli flag would go up, right? But this is my patriotic days. After I studied objectivism and the importance of the state of Israel in my hierarchy of values went down, right? It still may be high, but it's way down than what it used to be. I don't feel teary-eyed every time I see the Israeli flag going up, right? Or an American flag or any flag for that matter. And indeed, the American flag became more important to me than the Israeli flag. So my emotions changed as a consequence. So we have emotions, but reason is our means of survival. The way in which, what makes us different from animals is not our emotions. Dogs have emotions. They feel something, right? They feel pain, pleasure, at the very least.
Creativity then. Do dogs have creativity?
No, they don't. But what they don't have is abstract thought. They don't have abstract thought. And what reason is our ability to observe reality, integrate the facts of reality into abstract concepts, and then work with those abstract concepts to come up with even more abstract concepts. So we have a means by which to integrate the knowledge of our senses and create knowledge and to come up with, therefore, creative truths. We can come up with science. We can discover the world around us, but we can only discover it through our rational reasoning faculty. We can induce truths. We can then deduce. Those are things animals cannot do. And only because of that do we, as a consequence of that, do we get emotions. I don't think we have instincts in the typical sense.
But wait, sorry, before we get to instincts.
Sure.
So I fundamentally disagree with the sentence that our emotions come from logical conclusions, because first of all,
they don't have to be logical.
Sorry, come from rational or
No,
reasoning.
they don't even have to be rational. They just have to be conclusions.
I still disagree, because if your dog dies, you feel sadness. The sadness doesn't come from any reasoning process. Reasoning comes later. I mean, there's a lot of scientific evidence that proves confirmation bias, which is precisely your emotion when you feel something which disagrees with you, makes you ruins your reason.
I'm not saying that what happens. So let's get clear on what I'm saying.
Okay.
I'm not saying is what happened. The dog dies. I sit there and say,
this is bad for me.
My dog died. This is bad for me. And then I get the emotion. That's ridiculous. Of course, that's not true. I first feel the emotion. But why do I feel the emotion? Because before my dog died, while he was alive, I came to the conclusion that my dog was a huge value to me. And then when my value disappears, I feel the emotion. But if I come to the conclusion before my dog dies, I really don't like my dog. This is really a waste of time. What the hell do I need a dog for? And he dies, my emotion is not going to be that great, right? So the conclusion about the value of my dog to me had to come before I feel any kind of emotion when he dies. But of course, so what the emotion is an automatic, instant response that is conditioned by a whole set of evaluations I made in the past, and some of which I'm conscious of, and some of which I'm not. I might not even be conscious of what conclusions I came to that led to this particular emotion. And that's, again, one of the roles of psychotherapy, is to figure those kind of things out.
Yeah. And what about confirmation bias? Like, there's hundreds and hundreds of studies about this, about how people first feel an emotion and then do what we call motivated reasoning. So the emotion comes first, and
but as I said,
it's stronger than reason even.
But as I said, of course, the emotion always comes first. And then the question is, and evaluating everything, am I being rational or not? Confirmation bias is a form of irrationality that a lot of people engage in. So I'm not saying people are rational automatically. They're not. I wish the world would be completely different if people were rational. They're not. Rationality is an achievement. Rationality is something you have to work for. Rationality requires effort. It requires... So, for example, if we know we generally have confirmation bias, if that's just something that people are likely to do, then we need to be aware of that. And when we think about something, we need to say, well, am I sure that I'm not, what are the facts? Are the facts really aligning with this, or am I distorting the facts in order to get what I want to get, right? To conform to my emotion. And there are a lot of biases like that. And one of the rules of being rational, one of the rules of discovering the biases is to help us become more rational. So we're aware of them, we can control for them, and therefore go back to rationality. But the fact is that from being, very little babies, we learn and we come to certain conclusions about the world around us that shape our behavior following that.
Yeah, it was. Now it's clearer the order with which things happen, and it was very interesting what you said about the sadness coming from a previous valuation of something. That was cool.
Yeah. If somebody else's dog dies, you don't get sad because you never valued that dog, right? You never came to the conclusion that dog over there is important to me. I mean, so I'm not sad.
You might become, because we have an instinct for empathy, so for projecting other people's feelings. So if it's your friend's dog, you might feel sad.
If it's your friend dog, that you feel sad for your friend.
Because you value your friend.
Because you value your friend. You come to that conclusion. Yeah. But if it's, there's a dog dying every day somewhere in Porto.
Yeah, and a baby.
And a baby dying somewhere in Porto every day. I'm not sad. Even though I know that fact, it doesn't make me sad.
That's interesting. But the reason I think we're not sad is because it would be too much to handle. If you were constantly suffering the death of every baby at every moment, then everything would be worse because nobody could do anything.
Of course, but
it would be too sad.
It would be too sad, but of course it would be silly to do.
Yeah,
right?
It would be silly.
It would be anti your life. So we don't do it because it's not rational to do it. And what is close to us is of value to us because it's related to our lives.
But at the same time, shielding ourselves from a lot of suffering that's happening in the world at this moment can also be dangerous because maybe we can take part in making that better, and we're not because we're used to just shielding, and I just care about my friends and my family.
So I think if everybody cared about their friends and their family more than they actually do and did it rationally, there'd be a whole lot of less suffering in the world. The best thing we can do to reduce suffering in the world is be rational and pursue our own rational long-term self-interest, and there'll be a lot less suffering everywhere in the world.
Okay, we'll get there.
Everybody should do that. Just focus on yourself.
How did it feel? Because there's military conscription in Israel, right? So 2 years, I imagine, after reading that and becoming not a libertarian, because you don't like to call yourself a libertarian.
No, I don't.
After becoming an objectivist, how did it feel like for someone to tell you are going to the army right now and you have nothing you can do about it?
I mean, it felt pretty horrible. Now, I have to say, 2 years afterwards, I still had remnants of my old collectivistic self. So I think it was probably, it felt like it's something I had to do. I rebelled less against it than I would today if that was imposed on me. But yeah, it felt lousy. And once you get in there, it's even lousier because your freedom of choice is taken away from you. You follow orders. You do what you're being told. And different people handle that differently. My approach to handling situations like that was, there's nothing I can do about it, right? I'm not going to spend the next 3 years in jail. It
was 3 years at the time.
3 years.
Now it's still 3, right?
I think it's still
2
3.
for women, maybe.
It was 2 for women back then.
Okay.
Maybe it's a little shorter right now for women. 3 years. I'm going to do the best that I can and try to get the most out of the experience that I can, and that was my attitude throughout. It was 3, in some sense, wasteful years, and in some sense, years that I learned a lot about myself.
Okay, so now let's get into the story of Ayn Rand, because you headed this institute and you're still involved in it.
Sure.
But I'm actually more interested in you and in debating you, so not too long, but can you give us a quick biography of Ayn Rand and how she came to those ideas?
Sure. I mean, Ayn Rand was born in St. Petersburg, 1905. Alicia Rosenblum, so a Jewish family. She witnessed the beginnings of the Russian Revolution, basically right outside her door front in St. Petersburg. So lived under communism, under Lenin. Her father's pharmacy was taken from them. Obviously, it was a private business. She couldn't own a private business. Their apartment was taken from them. They had to share an apartment with other families. And she went to university in St. Petersburg, and it was very clear that she, at a very young age, had developed this individualistic spirit, and she would not survive. She would not survive communism.
She would be killed, probably.
She would be killed. Yeah. She could not keep her mouth shut. She challenged them. It went against everything she held, even at that young age. And so she found an opportunity to get out of Russia. There was a short period in which Lenin allowed for some people to leave Russia for her excuse was she was going to do research. She was working on film, and she was going to do research, and she had a cousin in Chicago who ran a movie theater. So the excuse was she was going to go to Chicago, study American film to come back. But everybody who knew her that she would never come back. So she left.
So on the paper, she was going for the benefit of the great nation. To research.
Yes, yes. Okay. On paper, she was going for the common good.
Yeah, exactly.
But it was clearly she was going for her own good, and the family knew it, and everybody knew it. And so she left, and she was in her 20s, in her early 20s. She arrived in the United States with nothing. She spent some time with her family in Chicago. Then she went to Hollywood. She loved movies, and she wanted to get into the movie business. Her dream, since a very, very young age, was to be a writer, and she thought that, a great place to start her writing career would be writing for Hollywood movies. First day in Hollywood, I mean, this is a true story. She goes to the Cecil B. DeMille studio. Cecil B. DeMille was the Steven Spielberg of his time, the greatest director of his time. And she goes, and she had a letter of introduction. And they said to her, we'll call you, don't call us, kind of thing. She walks out of the studio, and there's Cecil B. DeMille sitting in his big convertible, car, driving by, and she stares at him, this little Russian woman. And he stops, and he says, "Why are you staring at me?" And she tells him she's here for Russia and everything, the whole story. And he says, "Get in the car. I'll show you the movie business." And he takes her to the back lot where they're filming a movie. As it turned out, the movie was The King of Kings, the story of Jesus Christ,
Nice.
A silent movie. And he gave her a pass, and he said, here's a week you get to spend. She landed up being an extra on the movie and meeting her future husband on the movie set. And that was a kind of entry into Hollywood. She worked in all kinds of odds and ends jobs in the wardrobe and department, all kinds of places to kind of make ends meet. And ultimately married the man she met on the stage, who was an actor. And she then at night she would practice her English and start writing. And she started writing and writing.
So she wrote in English.
She wrote in English, and in the 1930s, she had a play published and performed in Los Angeles and in New York City. She published her first novel, which is called We the Living, which is the most autobiographical of all her novels. It's about a young woman's life in the Soviet Union. Very, very powerful anti-communist book. But it was panned by the critics. They didn't like it because it was anti-communist. And this is 1930s America, where the intellectuals were all pro-communism and enamored by Stalin and what was going on in the Soviet Union. She then wrote a small novelette called Anthem, which was published in the UK. It's a very small dystopian novel. The UK was going through a dystopian kind of novel period with George Orwell. And she got Anthem published in the UK. Only later on did she get it published in the US. All in the meantime, she's actually starting to write scripts in Hollywood. And so a number of her movies get made based on a script. She's reviewing scripts. She's, really, really part of Hollywood.
So she's made it by now.
She's made it, not
she's
financially.
Not struggling.
She's not struggling. She's doing okay. And then she writes The Fountainhead, and The Fountainhead is published. She sends it to 12 publishers. They all turn it down, and I think it's the 12th publisher accepts it. But they're not confident in it, so they only publish a few copies, 2,000 copies or something like that. And the novel becomes a word-of-mouth bestseller. It sells hundreds of thousands of copies right off the bat. And this is a huge success. And she becomes a very famous, very well-known author. And that's published in 1945. And then 12 years later, she publishes Atlas Shrugged. By this point, the publishers are chasing her. She's not chasing publishers. And Atlas Shrugged is an instant bestseller. And one of the things that makes Ayn Rand's novels, these are novels, of course, one of the things that makes Ayn Rand's novels so unique is that they sell as many copies today as they did when they were bestsellers. So she's this publishing phenomena where the book sales have just kept kept steady. Or they go up and down, but the numbers have been substantial even after she passed away.
So does the institute make money from that, or is the family making money from those books?
One of her students ultimately receives all the royalties from those books. And then after founding Atlas Shrugged, one of the things she said was her goal in her writing was to portray what she called the ideal man, right? What does an ideal human being look like? What are their values? What are the thoughts? What are the philosophy to guide an ideal man? And one of the things she did was she tried to, so what a philosopher's conception of the ideal man? So she went and she read a bunch of philosophers to try to figure this out because she's young.
A lot of philosophers had that question before.
Yeah, so she's young and she's trying to figure this out. And so she goes to the experts. Mm-hmm. And she finds all of them not just lacking, but pathetic. Right? She finds all of their answers thoroughly disappointing, really, really bad, completely inconsistent with her vision of what this looks like. And that forces her to develop her own philosophy. So it forces her to rethink it all. The only one she finds somewhat helpful is Aristotle. She views Aristotle as helpful here. So she becomes a philosopher, she says, in order to solve this problem, which is how to portray the ideal man in her fiction. She is a fiction writer first and foremost, and then she becomes a philosopher to solve this problem.
But she never wrote a philosophy book, or only later.
So first of all, Atlas Shrugged has a lot of philosophy in it. Mm-hmm. But then once that book is published and it's done, she turns to writing philosophy. So she turns to writing philosophical essays through the 60s and 70s for the rest of her life. That's really what she does. Anywhere from metaphysics, epistemology. She has a whole book on epistemology through ethics and politics and even aesthetics. There's a book called The Romantic Manifesto, which is her view of aesthetics. So she died in 1982 while I was in the Israeli army, and just a curiosity. It was announced on Israeli radio when she passed away. So her death, she had by that point become such a cultural phenomena.
She was Jewish.
Yeah, but I don't think that was it. I don't even know people really internalized the fact because she went by Ayn Rand, which is not a Jewish name. But no, she'd become a cultural phenomenon. She'd become a cultural phenomenon in the United States. And Israel was one of the places outside of the United States which she'd had a real impact on people, not just me, but a lot of people. She had become such a cultural phenomenon where her death was announced and people knew who she was and what that was. I think in the Anglo-Saxon world, I think she was a huge name by then. I think in the rest continental Europe less so, but certainly in the Anglo-Saxon world and in Israel, she was a big name.
So why do a lot of people not really like her? It's because she's a proponent for selfishness?
Yeah, at the end of the day, because she's a proponent of ethical egoism, she's a proponent of selfishness, but selfishness has a very bad name, particularly when articulated as selfishness. But also because of the implications of that is one of the implications of that is political. And the political implication of self-interest or rational egoism is capitalism. The system of capitalism is the only system appropriate for human life. And for human life of people pursuing their own rational self-interest. And of course, our world is thoroughly rejected capitalism and has an individual liberty and individual freedom, which she advocated for. And so,
you think the world has rejected capitalism?
Oh, absolutely. It never really embraced it, but it certainly embraced it a little bit in parts of the 19th century, and then it's rejected it completely. It rejected every single day. Right now, we're rejecting capitalism. Yes, we don't live under capitalism.
So let's define capitalism.
Capitalism is a system in which the government does one thing, and that is protect individual rights and otherwise leave us free. It's a system of property rights where property rights are protected, respected, and protected. And we don't live in such a place, right? You don't have property rights. You think you own a home. I don't know what it's like in Portugal, but in America, you might think you own a home, but try not paying your property taxes. And suddenly you discover you're actually renting that home from the government. You forget to pay your rents. You don't pay your property taxes. They'll come and take your home away from you. You don't own it. Try starting a business without filling out a million forms and waiting for the government to approve that you started a business. And then if you're in an industry that's heavily regulated, getting permission from a bunch of bureaucrats as to what you can and cannot do, cannot produce, cannot market. I was in the finance business. We had our instructions for what we couldn't do vis-a-vis marketing was 600 pages long. And and filled with regulations on just how to market ourselves, never mind how to run the business, which was another few thousand pages long. So no, we have no capitalism. There's no freedom in the world in which we live. We live in a place that is controlled by government in every step of the way.
But don't you see things like Coca-Cola and internet being everywhere in the world as capitalism being everywhere in the world, or capitalism reaching the whole world?
No,
I think you want so much capitalism that what we have now for you is not enough capitalism. And for me, I see the world that I think capitalism is what took a lot of people out of poverty in the last 100 years. And so there is capitalism. So it's what took people out of poverty.
Wouldn't you want more of it if it took people out of poverty? There is capitalism. To an extent, right? What we have is a mixed economy. We have a mixture. We have a mixture of capitalist elements. Coca-Cola, has some property rights over the brand name Coca-Cola. It has some capacity to produce the drink that it was, although even early on in its history, regulators told it certain things couldn't be in the Coca-Cola, and wait until RFK in the United States now, who's just appointed the Health and Human Services Secretary, gets his clause into Coca-Cola, right? He might add to the constraints on what Coca-Cola can and cannot do. So we have some elements of Coca-Cola of freedom, but we have massive elements of controls. Like Coca-Cola can't hire whoever it wants, and it can't fire whoever it wants. There are labor regulations, so they tell it who it can hire, under what conditions it can hire them, how much it has to pay them, and then what it can and cannot put in their contract with them, and when they can fire them, and how to fire them, and how it's not acceptable to fire them, and all of this. So Coca-Cola is a mixture of elements of freedom. I mean, they give us enough freedom so we don't complain too much, right? And then a lot of controls. And here in Portugal, you're relatively poor because you have more controls than we do in the United States, where we're relatively rich because we have less controls. So it is true that the more of this wonderful thing called capitalism we have, the wealthier we are, the better off we do, and the less of it, the poorer we are. But that's not capitalism. Capitalism is the pure form. Ayn Rand wrote a book called...
No, so is it anarcho-capitalism?
No. I don't want to narco anything.
Okay.
Right?
You want a state, but
I want a state that does one thing and one thing only, but it's really crucial it does it well, and it's really crucial it doesn't, and that is protect individual rights. What does that mean? It protects me from crooks and robbers, and it protects me from physical force being imposed against me. It protects me from terrorists. It protects me from invading army. But it also sets up a legal system where property rights are well defined and where fraud is defined. And when we discover the internet and the new applications to property rights, that the government steps in and says, okay, this is how we apply property rights in the internet. So it sets that up and then leaves, and then leaves it alone. But it's not a government that has warehouses full of books specifying regulations about what I can and cannot do with my life. It's not a government that tells me what I can and can't consume. We live in a world where, in Europe, for example, if you want to eat GMO, something, genetically modified stuff, you can't, right? Because the government decreed, not because the market has decreed. If the market decreed we shouldn't have GMO, fine. Then there wouldn't be a market for them. But the government has decreed you can't eat certain things. You can't, and it's only, there's a tendency for this only to get worse. This is why I said most nationalists are socialists, because most nationalists want to dictate how people live their lives. That's the authoritarian part of this mixed economy that we live under. So I want more capitalism. I want freedom. I want the government to be completely separate from economics. The government should have no role in economics. It shouldn't tell what businesses can and cannot do. It shouldn't tell employees and employers what contracts they can have between them. As long as there's no coercion, as long as there's not force, as long as I'm not forcing you to do something against your will by using force, it's none of the government's job to intervene.
So we're going to have that debate later on. Let me first ask you, so Ayn Rand, her idea of the ideal man and capitalism, somewhere in the middle here, you have a thing called objectivism, which we still haven't defined yet. So Why objectivism? Like, where does the word come from, and what are like the 2 or 3 main axioms of it?
Well, first, objectivism is the whole system, right? So it's this idea of an ideal man. It's the idea of what constitutes an ideal man. It's the idea of capitalism. Capitalism is part of the system called objectivism.
Okay.
Objectivism is the philosophy of Ayn Rand. So so the idea here is in metaphysics, which is the foundational, the nature of reality. Things are what they are, right? Reality is independent of your consciousness. Your wishes don't make it so. Things are what they are. A is A in Aristotle's one. There's a law of causality and a law of identity, and existence exists.
What proof do you have that all of reality is not a projection of your mind?
Because that idea is a silly idea, right? I mean,
that's not an argument.
Of course, it's an argument because a projection of my mind and our minds are somehow, projecting the same reality. And
no, I don't exist.
You don't exist. It's all
a projection.
So that's
it's possible, right?
It's not possible. It's silliness.
But what irrefutable proof do you have that that's not possible?
You can't prove a negative. That is, if you claim that reality is all a product of my mind, the burden of proof is on you, not on me. To me, it's just a silly made up fantasy. It's equivalent to that gremlin under the table is going to bite off your foot any minute now. He's invisible. And I can't prove that he exists down there, but you prove that he's not going to bite your foot in a minute. Well, one proof is that he won't bite your foot in a minute. It won't happen. But, you can make up any story that you want and pretend that it's knowledge, but that's not knowledge. It's just pretend, right? Reality is out there. It functions. I don't have control over it. I can wish, I can create a fantasy in my mind that the sun will not rise tomorrow, and yet it will rise in spite of that fantasy. And you could say, well, but the fantasy is overwritten. The other fantasies are overwritten that, but that's complete bullshit, right? It's just making stuff up in order to justify. So
but
if you
because
claim
you like
theory,
reason, because you like reason,
yeah.
I think you also probably like this kind of question, like what are the ideas that can stand below the idea that there is objective truth? Like there must be some reason. Otherwise, it's just so you have faith.
No,
you're a man of faith.
No, there's basically reality out there that what you observe. There's nothing else. So there's nothing underneath reality. Reality is axiomatic in that sense. The facts of reality are axiomatic. That's all we have. There's nothing else. So every starting point, you could say, oh, what's beneath reality? Well, whatever's beneath reality, what's beneath it, and what's beneath it, and what's beneath it. If there's going to be there's only one starting point, and that is this, right? This is the starting point. Otherwise, all knowledge falls apart. Otherwise, everything is unknowable. Nothing is knowable. So, and human existence is inexplicable. You can't explain human existence if reality isn't what it is and if it's not knowable.
What about a Matrix type scenario, like the film Matrix?
Again, it's complete fantasy. So you can claim that, and you can create a story like they do in the Matrix where it's okay. But to say that we're living in a Matrix requires proof. It requires evidence. It requires a smidgen of evidence, just a tiny little bit. And of course, there is none. Mm-hmm. So can I prove it's not true? Of course not. Just like you can't prove the invisible gremlin is not under the table. You can make fantasy up, and religion is very good at this, right? You can make up a fantasy about something and then say, oh, you can't prove my God doesn't exist. My gremlin doesn't exist. Therefore, it must exist. No, the other way around. You have to prove God exists, or you have to prove the gremlin exists.
What I'm telling you is you have to prove that there's objective reality.
No, you don't. That's the point.
So I think what you're saying is...
Objective reality is the starting point. Proof, the concept of proof. Think about what the idea of proof means. The idea of proof means what? What are we proving? It's a connection to reality, right? If there's no reality, there's no proof. So the very concept of proof rests on the existence of reality. So, and that's what axioms do, right? When you have an axiom, every subsequent concept, like proof, depends on that axiom. That is, if the axiom doesn't exist, all these other concepts disappear. There's no such thing as proof without reality. Where are you proving in? What dimension are you proving in? What context are you proving in? There has to be a reference point for proof. And usually what we move by proof is it relates to reality. It's over there. So how do you prove Newton's laws? You run experiments. Where do you run the experiments? In reality, right? How do I prove this is a glass?
Yeah.
Here, look, people, it's a glass. In reality, there's no other place, there's no other dimension in which I can, sorry. There's no other dimension in which I can prove anything except in reality. So these questions come from skepticism, and skepticism leads to the non-existence of proof. There is no proof under skepticism. Everything's whatever.
Yeah. Let's not dwell too long on it. I think we have more interesting things to talk about. So I
this is, of course,
you.
the foundation, right?
This is the
because
fun
without
part.
without this, everything falls apart.
Yeah.
Without a being able to tie things to reality, all knowledge is meaningless.
Yeah, I used to be more interested in these philosophical questions. Now I'm more interested in real life.
We can. I think this is real life, but all of this is real life.
No, I mean more like the consequences of your philosophy in real life.
Okay, so that's metaphysics. So metaphysics, things exist. The epistemology, the theory of knowledge, is we have the tool to know it. That is reason. Reason is our tool to know reality. Our senses provide us information about the real world, about reality, about what's there. We have the capacity to integrate that knowledge and then ultimately to test our theories out in reality. So reason is the way in which we know reality, and it's our means by which we survive. So reason is at the core. And then, who reasons? What is the entity that reasons? Well, it's the individual. It's man. And the individual survival is its ultimate the ultimate purpose of the individual entity is to survive.
Is that your life objective, just to survive?
Well, you added something. I didn't say just.
Oh, okay.
You said just. For me, yes, my objective is to survive. But what does survival mean to me, right? It means to survive as a human being, not as an animal, not as a chimpanzee, not as a cat, but as a human being. And that implies a lot of things. It means I'm to survive as a rational being, as a conceptual being, as a somebody who has a consciousness, a human consciousness. So, and that means to flourish. That means to succeed as a human being. So my goal in life, the goal of every human being should be to flourish in life, to achieve the most that they can in life, and that ultimately will lead to happiness. So happiness is the purpose purpose of life, and that's egoistic. So your purpose in life is not to sacrifice to other people. Your purpose in life is not to ask other people to sacrifice to you. Your purpose in life is to live the best life that you can live using your reason in order to live it. And then if I'm going to do that, then to maximize my success, to achieve the most doing this, I need to be able to think freely, and I should be able to apply my thoughts freely in the world. I should be able to do what I think will lead to my happiness. And the only system of government that allows me to think freely and to act freely is capitalism. And therefore, capitalism is good not because it reduces poverty. Capitalism is good not because it maximizes GDP per capita, which it does, and it reduces poverty. It does all these things. Capitalism is good because it leaves the individual's mind free and free to think what he wants to think, and then to act on those thoughts free of coercion, free of force, free of an authority that tells them what to do. And and then we could add aesthetics as part of Rand's philosophy if you want to get into that. But this is the core of it.
So where does love come into that? Is it just something that one more emotion, or do you think there's a place for love for all fellow human beings, and that if you feel that love, you should act upon it?
Well, there's a lot of questions there, but so love is an emotion that is life affirming. It is an incredibly powerful, positive, wonderful emotion. It is the emotion that guides much of what we do in life, in a sense that it is an emotion that is a consequence of finding in other people shared values with you, something that you share with them that unites you, and therefore you feel love. So I've often said that objectivism is the philosophy of love, because at the end of the day, you should care about yourself because you love yourself. You should love yourself. You are it. There's nothing else except you, in a sense. And you love your values, and you should pursue your values. You should figure out what values will lead to to making you the best person that you can be, and pursue them with the kind of passion that you pursue things that you love. And you should find other human beings, particularly for romantic love, but also for friendship and other forms of love that you want to hang out with, that you want to live your life with, that you want to have sex with, that you want to do wonderful things with, out of a sense of love and shared values. Now, can you love, humanity? In a sense, yes, and in a sense, no. You can love humanity in the sense that the idea of human beings and the idea of rational human beings is a wonderful thing, and you want to see humanity succeed because you're part of it, and it's part of your kind of shared presence on this planet, and it's a good thing. But there's, in a sense, no, because there's a lot of really bad people out there. And I don't love them. And there's a lot of people wasting their lives. There's a lot of people inflicting harm on other people's lives, really doing damage to people. I don't love them. I hate them. Hate is a very powerful, important emotion. It's not one we should put aside. It's appropriate for some people. So I don't love humanity in the sense that every human being. I love humanity in terms of the potential of every human being to be rational and to be a great person and to contribute to my life and to contribute to the lives of the people that I love.
But you do see value in someone walking on the street, seeing a child beggar and worrying about them and being kind and feeding them. Is there value in that?
Sure, if it's a child, yes.
Or an adult?
An adult, less so, a lot less so. Because it depends. Why is the adult begging? I mean, there are lots of jobs out there. Why are they here on the street begging when they could be working? I have very little sympathy for adult beggars, particularly if they're young and healthy. I feel a little differently if they're immigrants in an environment in which they're not allowed to be immigrants, that then not allowed to work. But certainly I feel differently about children because children, it's clearly not their fault, whatever's going on. But no, not every beggar gets my sympathy.
But do you see value in that? Do you think it's better for mankind that some people have that kind of kindness?
No, I mean, if I thought it was better, if I thought it was better for mankind, then I would share that kindness. So no, I don't think it's better. I don't think that kindness leads to particularly positive things, particularly if they're not willing to judge the beggar for who they are. That is, some beggars don't deserve our help. Some beggars do, and some beggars don't. And unless you're willing to differentiate between the two, you could be doing harm. You could be taking a very bad person. I
think this is where we clash.
Yeah, some people are wife-beating drunks. They go home every day and they beat their wife and they beat their kids, and they're bad, bad, bad people.
Do you have hope they might become better?
No, and I mean hope in a very abstract, very distant way. But no, everybody has free will, so they could come better. But the probability of them becoming better by you helping them, by giving them money, is almost zero. It is zero. Much more likely that they become better maybe if they go to jail, or maybe and spend some time in jail, suffer the consequence of their actions. Maybe if they get therapy or something like that. But you giving them money so they can go home, get drunk before they go home, and then beat their wife and kids, you are facilitating the beating that their wife and kids get.
But you're choosing the worst scenario possible. You're choosing the drunk man who beats his wife.
Yes, but that's my point. My point is that you can't just assume that every beggar is a good person, that everybody who receives help is worthy of that help. I want to discriminate. I want to be able to say some people are good and some people are not good. And we have to recognize that some people are not good and don't deserve our help, and some people are. Now, if I meet a stranger, my assumption is that they're a good person. Most people are good people. And so my assumption for every human being is that they're good people, and I'm willing to help, borrow other circumstances. I'm willing to help anybody. But, once I discover that they're not good people, I'm not going to help them. So I think this ability to discriminate is really important. So it's not like a Christian, I love everybody no matter what. It's I'm willing to support those people who I think can become better, and I'm not willing to support those people who I think are doing really, really bad things, and the chances of becoming better is small.
Okay, so let me put the question differently. Let's try and give a value to two different worlds. One is the world where we live in, where a certain percentage of the population feel inclined to help others in need and reduce their suffering and make them more free, because if you're not suffering, you become free. And another world,
that's not true, by the way, but okay.
isn't suffering a limitation on freedom?
No.
How can you focus on doing anything if something just went in your eye?
Freedom is not an issue of focus. I mean, we need to define our terms, right? I mean, it's important that we debate, right?
Do you think someone dying in a hospital bed is as free as a healthy person?
Maybe, or they might be as free as a healthy person. Freedom is not a condition of our physical or our psychological state. Freedom is a political condition. Freedom relates to politics. It does not relate. I'm not free to fly. Because I can't jump off a tall building and fly. So I'm unfree in the sense that I can't fly. That's ridiculous.
I think that's a definition that suits your philosophy.
No, where does freedom come from?
I think like reality, you said, we all know what reality means. I think we all know what freedom means. Freedom means your ability to do stuff. Yes. Your ability to do things. And if you're sick, you're not able to do as many things.
No, your ability to do stuff within a particular context. You can't say, if I'm sick, I'm unfree, right? Who's causing you, right? Freedom, what's the opposite of freedom? The opposite of freedom is not, death. The opposite of freedom is coercion. The opposite of freedom is coercion. So being sick, you can be just as free as being healthy. Now, you're more limited, obviously. You can't do as many things. So put it another way, is somebody who's wealthy versus somebody middle class, is the wealthy people freer than a middle class person?
Yeah, definitely.
But that's a perversion of the concept of freedom. It's a perversion that Marx loves. It's a perversion that comes from the left because it's trying to say the ideal of freedom is that we can do whatever we feel like doing, anything we feel like. This is why I said jumping off the building. Freedom is the ability to do whatever emotionally thing that we want to do. That's not freedom. Again, we go back to fantasy. Fantasy plays a big role in bad philosophy.
But isn't that what you're doing with your life? Aren't you trying to control as much of your life as possible and not have other people tell you what to do?
All about, gaining as much control over my life as possible, but I don't consider that freedom. I don't try to make a lot of money so I can become more free.
Because you're past a certain stage. If you're working in a factory to eat.
No, I mean, I've been there. Look, I wasn't born rich, and I certainly didn't come to the United States. When I immigrated to the United States, I came with nothing. So I know what it's like not to have any money, but that has nothing to do with freedom. It has to do with choices. It has to do with options. But choices and options are not related to freedom. Freedom is about the lack of coercion. Freedom is a political concept, and we make it anything else, we pervert the concept, because then it's problematic to say, why are they unfree in Iran? Are they unfree in Iran because they have a regime that coerces them and forces them, or are they unfree in Iran because they're poor?
I mean, they have both dimensions. There are a lot of dimensions
there's only
of
one
freedom.
dimension, and the dimension is force. Freedom is contrasted with force.
That's Marxist to say everything is about force. To me, everything's about power.
Not everything's about force. I never said that. You guys can check me out. You can rewind if you want. I said freedom is contrasted with force. That's the concept that we're talking about. And when we make freedom about not being able to do whims, whatever we feel like doing, we pervert the concept. We make it difficult to talk, like we're talking, about what the issue can be. There's an issue of poverty, but that's not an issue of freedom. There's an issue of oppression, Iran, that is an issue of freedom. When people say, when the founders of America say they're fighting for freedom, what are they talking about? Are they talking about they want more choices? No, they're talking about they want political freedom. They want political liberty. They want to get rid of coercion from a king, right? That's the concept in which freedom has come about. If you go back to the Enlightenment and think about what the thinkers in the Enlightenment were talking about when they talk about freedom, they're talking about freedom from the authority of a king, from the aristocrats, from a particular political system. I think that the idea that freedom is freedom to do whatever the hell you want, well, you're never going to have that, right? You can never do everything you want because you can't jump off the building and fly, right? Because there's such a thing. In spite of what you said earlier, there is such a thing as reality, and you will fall down and there's gravity and kill you. Yep. So you'll never have the freedom to do that. So you could say, I'll never be free. But
that's a bit absurd. Like within non-flying, within a normal life, people have more freedom than others.
No, I don't think that's true. People have more choices than others. people have more options than others, I would not categorize that in terms of more freedom than others. I do consider people having more freedom than others depending on the political system in which they live. Some political systems are more free than others.
Okay, so I'm not saying I'm right and you're wrong, but what I think
we can move on.
No, we're not moving on.
Oh, we're not moving on.
What I think might be happening is the following, and this is why I said that definition of freedom kind of serves your purpose, which is if you start admitting that someone with less education and worse health and so forth and so on is in a way less free than someone with all those privileges, then it kind of ruins this idea that freedom comes from this capitalism and not from helping people become more free by giving them education, by giving them healthcare, by giving them everything which will make their mind and their movements and everything about them more free.
Look, if you take a concept and distort its meaning, then it becomes useless. So let's put aside freedom. Let's ignore freedom. Let's make freedom go away. I don't want to talk about freedom. Okay, so do poor people have fewer options than wealthy people? Absolutely.
That's
no
freedom.
question about that. But it's not freedom. So what do you mean by freedom?
So freedom for you is just political. Freedom for me is having more options.
Okay, so why is freedom important? Why is having more options important? So so in your context, if we accept your definition of freedom, freedom just becomes an unimportant idea. So some people have more options, some people have fewer options. Some people are born with a higher intelligence, and some people are born with a lower intelligence. The ones with the high intelligence will have more options than the ones with the lower intelligence. There's nothing I can do about that. These people are going to be more free than those people for the rest of their lives. Is that a useful concept to have? No, it's a useless concept to have. So I want to deal with something I can control. What can I control? I can control the political situation in which people are present in. And if you say, okay, but poor people have too few options, I don't like how many options they have, I want them to have more options. Then we can talk about how do we get poor people to have more options. But if you start using the term freedom, you're basically wiping out the concept of political freedom. It becomes irrelevant. So if I take from these people,
political freedom is one of the freedoms. I'm not taking it away.
But you see, any attempt to increase their freedom, any attempt to increase their freedom in a sense artificially, the way you would want to have them, is going to reduce political freedom. So then freedom becomes a trade-off. So now we're trading off freedoms.
Maybe.
By definition, you're trading off freedoms. And I find that not a useful concept. I'm willing to say there's political freedom. I recognize that poor people suffer. Let's deal with how to deal with poor people suffering. I think one of the solutions to dealing with poor people suffering is freedom. That is political freedom. Political freedom minimizes the suffering of poor people. It gives them the most opportunities not to be poor. That's what political freedom does. But it doesn't change the level of freedom that they have. They have the level of freedom in the political situation that they have.
So I was in the middle of a question.
Yes.
So the world we have now where some people are inclined to help others in need, and therefore there's kindness and altruism, and another world where there's no altruism. Which world do you think is a better place to live in from a utilitarian perspective? So where are people on average better off?
So first of all, I don't like utilitarianism. I don't believe in utilitarianism, but I'll answer the question in spite of that. But before I do that, we're going to have a debate about another concept and its definition, and that is altruism. I don't believe that helping other people is necessarily altruistic. It might be, it might not be. Altruism is a particular concept used again, it was, by the way, invented by a French philosopher, Auguste Comte, in the 19th century. And he had a particular meaning in which he used it. And that means altruism is the sacrifice of your individual interest for the sake of somebody else. It is where you are worse off by helping somebody else. If you're better off by helping somebody else because you enjoy it, because you're having fun, because then it's not altruism.
Okay,
according to Comte.
That's not that's not how I use it.
Helping somebody, opening up a door for somebody and helping an old lady with her grocery bags might be altruism if you're delaying taking your kid to the emergency room and you're helping the old lady instead. But it might just be an act of kindness, which has nothing to do with altruism. Altruism, again, is the sacrifice of your own interest for the sake of others. And I know it's not how you use it because it's not how anybody uses it, but that's the sneaky way in which concepts are used in order to undermine reason and undermine rationality.
Like you use the word freedom.
No, like you use the word freedom and you undermine the ability to actually have a concept that relates to political freedom.
Political freedom. You just said it.
That's what
Yeah,
freedom
but okay,
is.
sorry,
Anyway,
let's move on. So forget the word altruism, kindness.
So yeah, a world with kindness is better than a world without kindness. There's no question about that. But indiscriminate kindness, that's altruism, and I'm against that. I'm against indiscriminate kindness. I'm for kindness. Now, do I prefer a world in which people are sacrificing for other people versus a world where they're not? I prefer a world where they're not. I prefer a world in which people are pursuing their own rational self-interest. And kindness is part of pursuing your own self-interest. You want to live in that kind of world where people are nice to each other, unless the guy over there doesn't deserve my kindness, and then I'm not going to be kind to him.
So basically, let me know if I'm wrong, but you're saying that someone with less kindness in them is not necessarily less moral.
Yeah, no, kindness is not an important part of morality at all.
Yeah, that's what's mind-blowing for most people about this philosophy, that kindness doesn't matter, because the whole West has a different idea, as I'm sure you know, that kindness is important.
Yeah,
taking care of.
We're in deep doo-doo because of that. We're in deep crisis, and we're going to have a hard time getting out of this crisis without it, as long as we stick to this altruistic view of morality. So the view of morality is, again, kindness is not a bad thing. But it's not a super good thing. It's okay, right? But it shouldn't be our primary focus. Our primary focus should be as individuals on our own lives and pursuing our own lives using reason. And that requires doing a lot of things. And part of that might include kindness towards other people, but towards some people, not towards everybody. And the closer the people are to you, the more kind you'll be to them. The further they are, the less kind you'll be to them, because it relates to you, your own life, your own happiness. And if we focused on that, the state of the world would be a lot better and people would be a lot happier with their lives.
Don't you think we got to where we are today, which is basically the West are the countries where capitalism, I'd say, you'd probably agree, capitalism is most free, right?
Yep.
In the US especially. Don't you think that's precisely because we had these myths and these moral frameworks which were about cooperation and kindness and sacrifice? Don't you think it's because of these winning stories that we got here?
No, it's the exact opposite. So those myths and those stories are what held us back for 2,000 years. They're what made us poor after the fall of Rome. They kept us poor for a long, long time.
How do they keep us poor?
Because, innovation, science, creativity require egoism. They require people thinking for themselves, about themselves, in order to pursue their values, the things that they love. And when you're told, don't love yourself, don't love the things that you think are not that important, what's important is what society thinks. The myths tell us you should sacrifice to a being up there. You should sacrifice to your fellow man. You should sacrifice to your state. You should sacrifice to whatever. Don't think about yourself. You can't get a Leonardo da Vinci from that kind of philosophy. You can't get a Michelangelo from that kind of philosophy, right? And you can't get ultimately capitalism out of that philosophy. So what happens is the myths start shattering. And the myths start shattering around the Renaissance with the discovery of a different vision of man. Suddenly, a different set of myths was discovered, and that's Greek philosophy and Greek sculpture and Greek art. And suddenly there's this view of, whoa, we don't have to be this groveling multitude worshiping, at an altar of sacrifice. We can be heroic. Look at these sculptures. Whoa. People once thought this was possible, to be great as a human being, as an individual.
But that never went away.
Oh, of course it went away. Have you seen the gargoyles of the Dark Ages?
But they were always great people. There were great nuns who were great inventors, like Hildegard von Bingen. Like there's a lot of creativity.
There was almost no creativity for 1,000 years in the West. I mean, really, for 1,000 years. There was no astronomical observation. From 400 AD to 1400 about, there was no astronomical observations in the West. There were astronomical observations in the Muslim world. There was for a short period of time. There were astronomical observations even in India and China, but there was no astronomical observations in the Western world. There was no science. Science was reading the ancients and following them. There was no creativity. There was no new discovery.
I
For
agree.
1,000 years, yes, there were little things, and one of the reasons you know her name is because there were these, once in a while there was somebody who was unusual, but there was basically Western civilization declined with the fall of Rome and stagnated until the Renaissance. And again, there was, starting in 100, there was a little bit. Charlemagne wakes the West up a little bit, but nothing significant.
We're talking about 1,000 years and the entire humanity during those 1,000 years. Of course, there were a lot of creative people.
There was very little creativity because the fact is, again, you have to read what life was like during those 1,000 years. It was a life of drudgery. It was a life where you had to work every day of your life in order just to survive. You had to work from sunrise to sunset just to feed your family.
Some people still do that.
Very few people today do that, and that's true, and that's sad. It's very, very sad that those people have to do that, given that we're in the 21st century and not in the 9th century. But in the 9th century, people didn't have time to be creative. You need time to be creative. You need wealth to be creative. There's no creativity in Africa. And the reason there's no creativity in Africa is because they're too poor to be creative. Now, again, that's a generalization. I'm sure there's some creative people in Africa. But overall, Africa is not where you get entrepreneurs and new innovation. Why? Because they don't have the time for it. They don't have the wealth for it. They don't have the resources for it. The West went through 1,000 years where these myths were dominant and these myths kept people poor. And only with the shattering of the myths, and which happened even more so during the Enlightenment, did we, and the marginalization of religion, and the marginalization of Christianity, and the taking the Christian myths and marginalizing them, putting them to the side, and saying they're not that important, and raising to the forefront what do we call the Enlightenment? The age of reason, bringing back reason after its slumber for 1,000 years. Only then do you get this explosion, and explosion is an understatement, right, of creativity and innovation and wealth creation and capitalism. What you do is you liberate the human mind. And what you see is incomes which are stagnant for 100,000 years. If you look at graphs of income, it's stagnant for 100,000 years. Wealth.
100,000 years.
100,000 years. There's very little change in human income. And that's just factual. And the same with wealth. I mean, a little blimp up in Greece and Rome, and then it goes back down, and a little bit up in the Renaissance, and then it goes like that.
Yeah.
I mean, we're so much richer today than those people you talked about.
I have that graph here because I wanted to ask you a question about. Yeah, it was
so there's the graph.
Zero.
And when does the inflection point happen? Right, the inflection point happens in the Enlightenment, and it happens because
Industrial Revolution also.
Well, but the Industrial Revolution is caused by something. It's caused by the Enlightenment. So the inflection point is 1776, according to me. Right, just because it's a nice round number. Right, it's the founding. It's the publication of Wealth of Nation by Adam Smith. It's the first commercial use of the steam engine, and it's the Declaration of Independence of America, which defines what? The rights of man, individual rights, the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The first political document to articulate a strategy for freedom, a strategy for liberty, a strategy for capitalism. And that's what sets off human creativity and creates the wealth that we have today.
Why do you think it happened in Europe, though?
Well, it happened in Europe because Europe was the one who kept a hold of the tradition of Greece. So it happened for a little bit in the Muslim world. From between about 900 AD to about 1200 AD, there was the equivalent of a Islamic Renaissance, call it. And what happened was that the Muslims in there, when they were invading all these territories, they're invading territories that have these magnificent libraries of Greek work. And one of the things they do is they translate it all into Arabic, and suddenly they start studying Aristotle, and they start looking at Aristotle, logic and metaphysics of reality, and they embrace that, and they start. The biggest question our philosophers have during this period is faith versus reason. How do we combine the two? And you can't, so they have a really hard time doing it. But during this period where reason is being elevated, they flourish. The science and algebra and mathematics, all these things do really, really well under the Muslims during this period. And then at some point, they make a crucial decision. They make a decision to turn their back on reason and to embrace faith. Some have argued it's one particular philosopher, Al-Ghazali, in the 12th century, who basically says, forget reason, it's all about faith. But as a culture, particularly outside of the Iberian Peninsula, particularly in the Middle East, they reject reason. And once they reject reason, they go back to being the barbarians they were before, and the barbarians we in the West were at the same time. A little bit of it that remains in Spain, right, and in southern Spain with the Moors. And of course, when the Christians conquer Spain, what do they find? They find libraries. Libraries filled with writings of philosophers, including Aristotle, including the Arab and Jewish philosophers who had been inspired by Aristotle. And they bring that back to the West. And that is what creates the Renaissance. That is what revitalizes the West. So it's the impact of those ideas brought into the West by people like Thomas Aquinas that resulted in it happening in Europe. By the way, why doesn't it happen in China? In my view, and this is pure speculation, whereas everything else is truth. This is speculation. I think China never had an Aristotle. I think Aristotle is the key figure in Western civilization. China never had him and never really imported his ideas. So they never had a metaphysics and epistemology of reason. And therefore, they advanced, and then they reached a cap, and then they declined, and they rise and decline. Because there are periods in which China's civilization is much more advanced than the West's, than Europe's. But Europe had Aristotle. So it basically goes down to Greek philosophy, primarily Aristotelian philosophy. But the tradition of Greece is what makes the West unique, nothing else.
So you think it comes from Aristotle more than Jesus or any other thing that came later?
I think Jesus is the force dragging us down.
Wow.
So
that will be the thumbnail. Jesus is the force.
Absolutely. You can. I'm happy to be
the Antichrist.
Associated with that.
The Antichrist.
I mean, in my view, yes, Christianity is an anti-Western force. Christianity is an anti-progressive force. It's trying to drag us backwards, whereas Greek ideas, Greek philosophy, science, and the Enlightenment are what are moving us forward. And when Christianity dominates, any culture where Christianity dominates deeply is a culture that does not advance and does not progress, and that's 1,000 years of the dark to Middle Ages.
All right, so let's get into more practical stuff. So let's start with the following. Let's say you live in a village and you're a good neighbor. Everyone's an objectivist. It's your dream. But there's only one river, and the river flows through the village. It's the river that everyone is quenching their thirst from. And you, in pursuit of your self-interest, you decide to make a small factory a bit upstream, which pollutes everyone's water. Don't you think that the government has a role in regulating what you can and cannot put in the river, which belongs to everyone?
Well, there's no such thing as a river belonging to everybody.
It belongs to the country.
The country can't own rivers in my world, right?
How come?
So the country owns nothing. Capitalism is a system in which the government has no property, owns no property. The river should be owned by somebody. It might be owned through a corporation by various members of the village. It might be owned by one guy in the village. It might be owned by the guy who's polluting the village. But it has to be owned by somebody. Somebody's going to own the river. I think that is true of beaches. That is true of the so many miles out into the sea that is supposedly part of this country. All of that should be privatized. Every last inch of Portugal should be owned by somebody. And I think it will all be taken care of much better. It will all be prettier. It will all be nicer, and all be cleaner because, you can pollute, quote, public property because nobody owns it. That's the whole point about public property. Nobody owns it.
We all own it.
There's no such thing, right? If anything that's owned by everybody is owned by nobody. And it's treated that way. And we treat it that way.
If it's 2 people or 3 people, like when in your mind does it start to be nobody? What's the number?
Well, as soon as you, by any kind of legal means, don't have any control over it. So do you have any control over the rivers in Portugal?
Of course, I vote.
You don't vote for the rivers in Portugal.
Yeah, of course you do.
No, you don't.
Some political parties are more interested in preserving, others are less interested in preserving.
Yeah, but you're voting for a political party that represents a variety of different interests in which this river is one. If we had a corporation that included all the citizens of Portugal who owned that river, then yes, then you would have a private ownership and it would be owned by a private entity. But right now it's not owned by anybody because there is no private property. All there is private property. There's no such thing as collective property. So if you have a million people who all have a share, a private ownership, and therefore have control of it, then it's private. even though it's 1 million people. But if you have a political system, it's owned by nobody, and it's treated as if it's owned by nobody, right? It's secondary thought. Nobody cares about it.
But that's why I'm saying, shouldn't there be someone regulating if you should pollute it or not?
The private property owners should be regulating it, and of course the users. Now, what usually happens is rivers is that people who own the water downstream who are using it, and the people who own the water upstream, and they might be polluting it. And the people upstream and the people downstream need to come to some agreement about how they're going to use the water. And you have a legal system in order to arbitrate disputes like that. That's what we have, a tort system, a common law system. It's worked in the past. It can work in the future. Instead of the government coming in and giving one standard system by which everything functions, different rivers are going to be dealt with in different ways, depending on the needs and concerns of the different stakeholders of those rivers. That's what private ownership provides.
So if the guy who owns the factory also owns the river, then he can pollute it.
Well, not if the people downstream have been using have a use right to that river. They've been using that river for water. Then they're going to sue the guy upstream for polluting their water.
They'd need a contract they need to have a contract.
They don't need a contract.
Someone.
They can go to the courts and say, our water used to be clean and we've been using this water forever. And now it's dirty. Stop the guy from doing it. I mean, this was done in the West in the United States. A whole legal theories arose out of how do we deal with private water rights. This is not science fiction. It's not that complicated, and it works 1,000 times better than the system we have today, where the guy upstream is going to bribe the right politicians, and we don't bribe them anymore with suitcases full of cash, although sometimes that happens. We bribe them through campaign contributions and taking over a political party or whatever, and he gets the regulators to write regulations that are in his favor, or the townspeople have the regulations right in favor that wipes out the guy on top, even though he's not really polluting the river. So what we have today is a non-fact-based political pressure group system that is the worst of all worlds. A private system would work a lot better in cleaning up the rivers. We'd have much cleaner rivers in my world than you do in your world.
But isn't his decision to make a huge contribution to a political party also a decision in his own self-interest? So objectivist?
No, not really. Not if he understands the fact that a political system in which the government is doing the bidding of business is bad for everybody.
But isn't that a bit naive?
No, it's not naive at all.
It reminds me a bit, and this is going to sound really offensive to you, of communists. Because sometimes communists are naive. They think that everyone will share everything and it will be utopian.
I think
you're naive in a similar way, is that you think there will be no villains. You think there will be no one
I think there are going to be lots of villains. I want to build a system to prevent those villains from ever getting power. I think that the system you have today, that you love today,
I don't love it.
is a particularly villainous system, because it gives the government power over our lives. And then all kinds of people who the government has not power over them are going to get together, raise money, and form all kinds of coalitions in order to influence the government. And that's what we have today. What we have today is what I call pressure group warfare. That's what politics is in the United States. That's what politics is. It's warfare. It's I want to, and if you're somebody stuck in the middle, then you've got coercion on this side, you've got coercion on that. Everybody's trying to screw you. I want a system where politicians have no impact on the economy. So nobody has an interest in lobbying them. Nobody has an interest in giving them money, because they can't do anything with that money, right? So if the politicians cannot decide what will happen to this river, then why would the businessmen give them any money? You'd give them no money.
Yaron, I understand what you say, and I agree with nearly everything you're saying. But imagine you live in that village, right? And suddenly your water is polluted. You have nowhere else to drink. Let's say you put that man in court.
Yeah.
What are you going to drink for the 2-3 years that's in court?
Oh, come on. I mean, there's a variety of ways in which we can drink to survive the trials in court.
But do you understand?
We
do you
can
think
bring in bottled water.
But do you think that's ideal? Who is
yes, of course it's ideal. But you're
trusting. You're.
I'm not trusting anybody.
You're trusting the capitalist making the factory too much.
No, you're
like our ability to drink water from the river is dependent on that guy having a sense that if he pays the government, that will be worse for everyone.
No,
that's a long shot.
Because in my world, he can't pay the government. That's my point I made earlier, right? In my world, he cannot pay the government. He's not going to
be kind. Maybe he has to be kind towards the people.
Maybe he can be kind. Maybe the people downriver are buying his products, and he should be kind to them because they're his future consumers. Maybe he should be kind because they're going to sue him, and he's going to spend 3 years in court having to fight with them, and he's probably going to lose because the fact is he's polluting the water. So the likelihood that somebody upriver is actually going to pollute the river is close to zero. And I'm not saying it's close to zero because he's a good guy, but because he does the analysis and he sees that these people down here have a real claim to the water. They have a real claim to it, and they will sue him. And he's going to lose the lawsuit, and he's just going to have to pay them a bunch of money for all the bottled water they spent 3 years drinking. And he's ultimately going to have to clean the river himself anyway. So what I'm saying is the capitalism and the system of property rights is a system that basically aligns people's interest. It doesn't put them in conflict. Whereas the system today, he pays the politicians and the village is screwed. That's exactly how it works today. And in capitalism, that's not how it works because he cannot pay the politician because the politician has no power over the village or over him. So he has to go to court, and he's probably going to lose in court. 99% he's going to lose in court. So he doesn't pollute to begin with. Why would a businessman want to waste his time in court when he's got a lot of things to do to make a lot of money for himself?
I mean, there are a lot of stories of big pharma and other companies who know that they're going to be in court for a lot of stuff, but it's part of the business cost. But let's move on.
No, but you see, again, it's all perversion and distortions because we live in a mixed economy. We live in a system in which, first of all, where it's not that clear who's at fault. It's not clear that they're to blame or not to blame. And look, yeah, are they going to be businesses in some circumstances take on some risk, legal risk? Sure.
Yeah, legal risk.
Sure. But if you didn't portray this as maybe he's polluting the water, maybe he's not, you portrayed it as polluting the water, right? So there's not a lot of legal risk there, right? These people are clearly damaged. There's clearly, this is not about legal risk. This is about he's going to lose. Right? So yes, there's always going to be things that you do that might be ambiguous in a lawsuit.
But so let's go back to the property thing. Why do they have the right to drink the water from the other man's river if it belongs to no one? Because that's the thing you would say they would go to court and complain about. We used to have water, we don't have water anymore. Hey, the river doesn't belong to the country.
Because there is a concept called the right of use. So just like you can't. I have a home here and you buy all the homes, all the property around it and don't let me pass and I starve to death in my property. You can't do that, right? There is a right to access. There's a right to use something that you have used in the past and to expect a certain quality of it.
But why, if it belongs to you, why should I have that right to drink from that water?
Because of the fact that we live in a social context in which you are using that water. That use has given you the right to it. It's not just water running through your village. You're actually using it. That gives you a property right. Property rights come from use. Where do property rights come from? I mean, John Locke talks about this. Property rights comes from fencing off a particular area and actually cultivating it, actually doing something. The right comes from the use. Right doesn't come from God. It doesn't give it to you by the state. It comes from actually creating something.
We still have a law here where if you occupy an abandoned land for 20 years or something, it becomes yours, which is consistent
I don't
with
think that's completely... First of all, I think that should definitely apply to public land, so-called government land, right? Then if you occupy government land and you have it for 20 years, it should be yours. It should be yours 5 minutes into occupying it, never mind 20 years. But even private property, if private property is abandoned, if somebody owns a piece of property and then they abandon it, they leave and they don't do anything to it for a certain number of years, how many years the courts can decide, let's say it's 20, and after 20 years, the property is abandoned, anybody could take it. So yes, I think that the idea of abandonment and the idea of use is where rights come from. So it's not that suddenly they get rights. It's the fact that they used it. It gives them the right.
Yeah, but that raises another question, which is if they had started using it yesterday, would they have that right? They started drinking from the river the day before it was polluted.
Maybe. I mean, again, these are tricky legal questions we'd have to figure out. What if they didn't use it and then after it's polluted, they decided they want to use it? No, then they don't have the right to it. But, again, can you come to some arrangement? And look, I'm not saying that...
It sounds quite complicated.
Rights over water are not simple, but they're not impossible either.
So here in Portugal, we have a law where if you have a car which is older than 5 years old or so, every year you have to go to a government-certified private company which checks if the car is okay. And I think this is a good thing because it protects us from irresponsible car owners and it reduces the likelihood that me and my child will die on the highway. What do you think about this regulation?
I hate it, like I hate all regulations. It's terrible. It's not as bad as many other laws that are much, much worse. But it's like seatbelt laws, grow a spine, become an adult, and wear a seatbelt. And if you don't wear a seatbelt, suffer the consequences. Now,
it's different. Seatbelt protects you. The car inspection protects
the car
everyone
inspection
else.
is the same way, unless you can say, again, objectively in law, that running a certain level of decrepit car poses a objective risk to other people. So here's what would happen this law doesn't exist in the United States, by the way. There's no such law. I don't have to take my car into an inspection ever. I get it authorized once a year. I get it renewed, but it's not an inspection that says if the car is running or not. But you know what? If I in a free society, if I get in an accident and I caused the accident, I'm liable. So,
yeah, but me and my wife and my son died.
That's sad.
And we'd rather not die.
Yeah, that's very sad.
But isn't it better for everyone to protect?
No, because you've created
irresponsibility?
Here an entire bureaucracy. I'm going to say it costs 5 million euros a year to run this bureaucracy, and people have to spend time, which they could be productive doing other things in order to do that. So let's say with the time and with everything, I'm making up a number.
Yeah,
let's say it's 10 million euros. 10 million euros that could be put to productive use that, a bunch of poor people could not be poor now instead. And, but I don't do these utilitarian calculations. Generally,
but
not generally.
Life is worth infinite, right? Life is worth infinite dollars.
To whom? To the person dying, sure.
Yeah.
But he doesn't have an infinite number, so he can't pay it.
No, but the thing is,
your life is not worth an infinite amount of dollars to me. If you get sick now of cancer, and somebody comes to me, you could save his life, and it's not even finite, right? It's not even high, right? You could save his life. We need $100,000 from you. It's unlikely I would give them $100,000. Now, if they said $1,000, I might say yes. But I know you and I like you, and I'm not willing to give you a huge amount of money. So your life is not infinite to me. It's not even that high in terms of the value posed to it. And
I'll call you when I get cancer for those $1,000.
I'm happy to write you a $1,000 check. But it's not the case, right? It's not the case that there's a social value in things. So
no, but I want to protect my family from the irresponsible car owner.
The best way for you to protect your family, not from the irresponsible car owner.
That's who we're protecting.
Let me just finish, because you want to take reality and break it up into little scenarios, and I don't, because I know the solution to how to protect your family best overall, how to give your family the best life possible, not just to live, but to flourish and be successful, and that's to establish freedom. Political freedom.
But I'm doing that at the same time.
No, you're not. Because
you're
not. Because you violated political freedom by requiring people to get their cars checked. And that's a little violation of freedom. But that's a little violation of freedom. There's going to lead to a bigger violation of freedom, because slippery slopes happen everywhere. As soon as you're willing to use coercion, you're willing to use coercion. And I can think of a million scenarios where regulating the guy's car is small relative to, I don't know, I won't use a personal example. I've got the solution to rape. I know how to reduce rape in our society to zero. I mean, it's fairly easy. You have a curfew on all men starting at 6 p.m. at night until 8 a.m. in the morning, and it won't be zero, but it's going to be very close to zero. We reduce rape. That's worth infinite amount of money. It's infinite. So why can't we just do a curfew on a man? Now, some men will never rape, granted, but we can't really differentiate. We don't have the tool to tell who can and can't. So we're just going to make sure that all men stay inside, during the times of day when usually rape happens. Why is that illegitimate? So as soon as you're willing to violate people's freedom, there's no limit to how much you're willing to violate people's freedom. And I'm saying I'm never willing to violate people's freedom, even when I can't give you the exact answer why this particular regulation, is more harmful than good, because the fact that it's a regulation is more harmful than good. The fact that it's a violation of somebody's freedom is more harmful than good.
But you do believe in punishment through taking people's freedom?
Yes. After the fact, after they've committed a crime.
But then your child's already dead.
That's true.
And so you'd prefer to live in that world?
Yes, because I don't want men to be incarcerated for 14 hours a day in order to prevent harm from happening.
Okay, let's move on. This is the Antichrist, like I said before. Food. So I think it's a good thing that people can't just put any substance in children's food that will make it super tasteful and addictive and so on and so forth. What about you?
I think it's a good thing that they don't do that, yes.
No, but there are laws that prevent people from being villains.
Again, I think those are the same laws that prevent a lot of progress from society, and I would rather those laws didn't exist, and that you as a parent cared for your kid and don't buy those goods.
Yeah, but once
Not
again,
hard to
you're
figure
assuming
out what's good and what's not.
No, you're assuming that everyone has information about everything.
Not everybody. Some kids will be harmed by it. That absolutely, there's no question about that. But more kids are harmed by the fact that there's not absolute freedom in the world in which we live.
How are they harmed in the arena of food by not having that freedom? Option, sorry.
In the arena of food, there are a lot of people in the world starving to death today. There are a lot of people in the world that don't have access to food because of lack of freedom.
But what harm is it to restrict what substances can be put into food?
Nothing specifically for that, assuming you know what substances are good and what substances are bad, and you don't. You don't.
No, you're based on reason.
Our knowledge of nutrition is very limited. But it's a much broader argument. That is, again, I'll go to the same argument I made before, right? The job is not to prevent harm. The job is to protect people's rights. The job is to protect our freedom. It's not to prevent harm. The job of government is not harm protection. And if it is harm protection, you cannot make an argument about why we cannot incarcerate men for 14 hours every day to prevent rape. And indeed, murder. Murder would go down dramatically if all men just stayed home, if they never went outside. They might kill their wives, but there's a lot of
being
things.
Utilitarian though, because you are comparing that restriction on freedom with the potential benefits.
No, I'm not. I'm using your framework. What I'm saying is, I'm not weighing goods and benefits. What I'm saying is, the ultimate good is political freedom. The ultimate good is the government doesn't tell companies what they can or cannot do. That politically, that is the good. And I believe that the outcome for food would be better under a scenario like that than it is today. I think you might say, look, let's be clear. If you're putting poison into the food, and we have to define what poison means, right? If it's killing people, I literally eat it and I die, right? Then of course that's wrong, right? That's. Yeah. And if you're putting,
where do you draw the line then? If it's making cancer,
again, what causes cancer? Do we know what causes cancer? Once we absolutely know that X chemical causes cancer, yes, then you ban that chemical. But we don't know that.
Okay, so the government can ban chemicals in food.
Of course it can, if it's violating rights, if it's doing harm. But
if it's addictive, let's say they put cocaine in chips, in children's chips.
If they put cocaine in children's chips, God, I've never heard that question before.
This is why I'm here.
No, I don't think the government should get involved in that. But
they will become addicted to junk food. MSG is because of sometimes MSG.
They already are addicted to junk food, if you haven't noticed. MSG is not addicted. That's complete nonsense. And junk food is not addictive, and chocolate's not addictive. Do you know what addiction?
Dopamine is.
Dopamine is not addictive. This is nonsense. It's, again, taking a concept of addiction and expanding it so broadly that it becomes meaningless. Have you ever seen somebody try to get off heroin?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's addiction.
I give them money.
That's addiction.
To get heroin.
To get heroin.
Yeah.
So that they don't.
No, because this has happened to me at least 2 or 3 times. I see them in a state of so much suffering
yes.
that I really think.
When they get off of heroin.
Yeah, I know. Yeah,
So you give them a little
need
bit.
it. I give
Fine.
it to reduce their suffering.
I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but we can talk about that separately. But the point is this: that's addiction, right? You are biologically fighting against getting off of heroin. I'm addicted to chocolate. Every day I go home, I like to take a little bit of chocolate. I'm not addicted. Tomorrow I could stop. Nothing would happen if I stopped.
Okay,
so the
people
idea
use
of
the word.
People use the word addiction. We're not addicted to dopamine. That's complete nonsense. We're addicted. There's substances that really cause addiction. There's substances that don't. Look, if you can show clear, unmitigated harm by a substance, right? That it goes back to the water, right? You're polluting the water. How do we know it's polluted? Maybe I can just drink it, right? If that water is clearly causing the village harm, then they can sue, or the government can, if it's cyanide in the water and people are dropping dead, they can ban. But where that line is has to be really, really clear. For example, for a long time, we thought that eating cholesterol causes heart disease. So you would have banned cholesterol, which means ban meat. All meat has cholesterol in it. So nobody can eat meat because it causes heart disease?
Yeah, there are a lot of dangers in the...
So the point is that we have to be able to say, no, it causes real harm, documented. Today, we know that eating cholesterol doesn't cause cholesterol. That is, it doesn't cause heart disease. Eating maybe saturated fat does, but even there we don't know.
Maybe we'll soon discover it. We were right before.
But
you never know.
If there is clear-cut poison, then yes, the government can ban a poison.
Okay, victory. Let's move on to companies.
It's all part of protecting individual rights.
Yeah. So what do you think about cartels? So a few companies in their own self-interest, and in each one of them is manifesting themselves, trying to create a lot of win-win transactions in the world. They decide to get together and benefit each other. And
you mean like OPEC?
Like what?
Like OPEC?
Oh, no, but what do you think of cartels?
I think good for them. It won't last. It never does. And it should not be illegal. They've done nothing to harm anybody.
So companies should be regulated in that sense?
No, they shouldn't. I said nobody's harmed by it. It won't survive.
Isn't it a distortion of the laissez-faire capitalism?
No, laissez-faire capitalism doesn't view...
It's distorting the fair price.
No, what's a fair price? There's no such thing as a fair price.
It comes from supply and demand.
Fair price comes from supply and demand, and if somebody can corner supply, then the supply is supply and demand is demand. Nothing's changed. The laws of economics still apply. Prices might be higher, but there's no right price. There's no, you study economics, you study the stupidity of perfect competition, which is this Platonic mythology about what, competitive firms that all look alike and do exactly the same and have the same everything, and they compete, and therefore it's complete nonsense.
Oh, it happens in telecom. It happens here in Portugal. Between telecoms, they all have the same products and services, and I'm not saying they do have,
and therefore
cartel,
they don't innovate very much, and they don't do very much because they all look exactly the same and all regulated the same, and they're all controlled by the government, and they don't really have any freedom. So you get almost no innovation. They buy their innovation from places that are a little freer than Portugal, like the United States. So where we have a little bit more freedom, that's where the innovation happens. So I don't believe in government regulating business in any respect except when they produce poison. So if a cartel forms, then a cartel forms. That's part of life. But it won't. My point is, it won't survive because a competitor will arise and break them up. One of the companies in the cartel will cheat, and the cartel it's always happened. There's not an example in history of a cartel surviving more than a short period of time because somebody will always cheat or some competitor will arise to destroy them. There's no such thing in a free market as monopolies because there's always competition.
Don't you think that some companies get so big that they're not strictly a mythological monopoly, but they're almost a monopoly?
Like what? Give me an example.
Meta, Amazon.
Meta is a monopoly? On what?
No,
on social media?
After you have a large enough market share.
So you can't use Twitter? You can't use...
no, of course you can.
So how are they a monopoly? I don't use Facebook. I almost never use Facebook.
Or Instagram.
Okay, so what? So you got TikTok.
Yeah, I'm not saying they're on other companies. That's why I said sometimes they
How much does Facebook and Instagram charge you for using them?
A bit.
Nothing. Zero.
Bit of my time.
Zero. Your time is your choice. You control your time. So zero. So how's it? So what? So they're big. Why is big bad?
Yeah,
There's nothing.
but I'm actually more
bad
interested
about
in what you said about you don't believe in this theoretical idea of the fair price, and that's maybe why cartels aren't very.
There's no such thing as a fair price.
So do you think it's morally correct for companies? Let's say there's one company which has a warehouse with a lot of wheat inside, and there's a famine going on, and the owner of that company, he decides to artificially suppress the supply side to make prices go up to make more profit?
No, the supply side is already suppressed because there's other people don't. Somehow wheat is not coming to market, so the supply side is already suppressed. So he's raising the prices.
No, but let's say he's purposefully lying about how much wheat he has.
Why did he need to lie? Why does he need to lie?
Because he wants to make more profit. He wants there to be.
So he doesn't have to lie. He can just release the wheat slowly. He doesn't have to lie. Why would he have to lie about it?
Yeah, he's not okay. But do you think that's moral?
I think it's absolutely,
in a famine.
Not only do I think it's moral, I think it's a good thing.
In a famine where people are
yeah, because that's the
starving.
only way. That's the only way you'll actually get a lot more wheat into production, right?
There will be a right amount to put out there.
What is prices going? I mean, let's not create fiction. Let's talk about reality, right? What if prices going up signal to the marketplace?
But on the famine side,
there's not enough supply.
I won't have food for my kids. On the other side, it's an opportunity.
Yes. So what happens during that opportunity? Wheat would flood the market from all other places, which is exactly what happens. So hoarding, or not hoarding, what do you call it?
I think hoarding is good.
No, raising prices during let's take a realistic scenario.
Masks in COVID. Masks during COVID.
Yeah, masks during COVID. So masks during COVID, there's a shortage of masks. Objectively, there's not enough masks. So I could sell them for $1 each, or I could sell them for $5 each. What do you think is the moral thing to do?
That's not food, though.
People are dying. People are getting sick.
Let's say.
So what do you think the moral thing to do? What do you think the good thing to do from a utilitarian perspective?
I think if there's a famine, you'd find a way for.
Forget about the famine. We got COVID and we got masks. What do you think the right thing?
No, but I started with the famine. I want the famine.
Okay, so let's do the famine. I have wheat in my warehouse. And
it costs you $1 for each kilo.
Cost me $1, and you
can sell it for $1.10.
No, I don't
you can
even
make 10% profit.
I don't have to sell it. I can be a philanthropist. I can give it away to everybody there. And what happens when all the wheat from the warehouse is gone?
You saved about 1 million lives.
No, I haven't, because the famine's still going on and my wheat has run out. It's zero.
Yeah, but it's like the drug addict. You reduce their suffering when they needed it instead of focusing on profit.
But I reduced their suffering, but they're still suffering, right? They've eaten the wheat that I gave them, and now they're still famine. So now they all die because the warehouse is empty and there's no new wheat coming in.
Yeah, that's why I said 10% margin on your wheat.
No, forget about the margin. I gave it to them for free, right? But now, let's say I increase the margin by 300%. And I sell the wheat for $4 instead of $1. And now the wheat goes out. But what happens instantaneously as I'm doing that? Everybody else in the economy looks at that and say, oh, wheat prices have gone up. They'll buy wheat from Brazil and they buy wheat from everywhere else and they bring it to market. And what happens to famine? It goes away. It goes to zero. So I'll save a lot more. No, I'm not kidding. You're laughing as if this is, literally the famine goes away.
No,
because I raised the price and therefore created a market for wheat where a market didn't exist for wheat. See, as long as the price is zero, I might be a philanthropist and give the wheat to them and some people won't die. But the famine will continue. But if you raise the price, other people will step in with their wheat and the famine will disappear. And philanthropists can buy the wheat for $4 and hand it out. And when all the wheat comes in, what will happen to the price of wheat? It'll come down. Go back down to 0 to 1. So, during hurricanes, for example, there's this idea that people want to flee the hurricane, right? So the gas station is not allowed to raise their price. So I've got a gas station. I could raise the price to $4 a gallon instead of $1 a gallon. But I'm not allowed to. So I have to sell it at $1 a gallon. So what happens? Everybody comes in, right? All these people fleeing the hurricane, coming in. They fill up their tank, and then they leave. And within a few hours, I have no gas to sell to anybody. So all these other people want to flee the hurricane. They get to my gas station. Sorry, there's no gas. But imagine I raise the price to $4. I raise the price to $4. Now people say, okay, I'm not going to fill up my gas. I'm only going to buy enough to get out of here. A small amount.
Maybe. I would still fill it up.
No, I mean,
in a hurricane.
So I would raise it to $10 a gallon.
Yeah, and I understand a lot of, if it was $10, a lot of people would want to put their gas there.
At the margin, you're going to have more gas over a longer period of time. Not that other people will bring gas. Just at my gas station will last for longer and therefore allow more people to flee the hurricane. So,
I don't know. I think most people would still fill up because it's a fight or flight situation.
That's because
that might just be me, but
no, it's just you. But it's not even just you. It's just you. Depends on how much money you have, right? So some people might fill up, but other people will not because they don't have that kind of money. And they might think I'll get to the next town and get a cheaper gas over there. The point is that the gas station has gas for longer, and therefore more people get out of it. Price gouging is a benefit, not a cost. It contributes. It doesn't retract.
So final question, because you have other stuff to do here in Portugal. What do you think about casinos? And no, I have two more questions quickly. What do you think about casinos, which ruin lives and ruin families? And what do you think are the best arguments against objectivism?
Yeah, I don't think casinos ruin lives. I think gamblers ruin lives.
That's an addiction. You can call that an addiction.
It's not an addiction. I've seen people who gamble. I've gambled periodically and stopped. It's not a problem to stop gambling. Like it is, again, compare it to heroin. Compare it to heroin. And heroin, as you said, God, the suffering they go through in order to get off of heroin. Nobody goes through suffering to get off of gambling. Gambling is a psychological thing.
But they lose all their money. They steal from their parents sometimes.
Okay, people are crazy and people are horrible. And if they steal, they should go to jail. So there are lots of irresponsible people in the world. And you don't encourage the irresponsibility by shielding them and protecting them, by passing laws that shield and protect them and coddle them as if they're infants. People are not infants. They need to be treated as adults. And some adults do bad things, and they should be treated as bad people. And so the government has no business in stopping casinos. I'm not a fan of casinos. Casinos make a lot of money over people's irrationality. And I think in a more rational world, and the more rational we become, the fewer casinos there will be because people won't be attracted to that kind of entertainment. Mm-hmm. But it's up to the individual to make a life for himself. Again, it's not society or the government's or your neighbor's job to take care of you. It's your job to take care of yourself. And everybody has the ability to do that. Nobody is born with a gene that makes it impossible for them to resist casinos.
Yeah. So this final question is something I do with all the guests. I'm going to invite you to steelman the position of someone who's against objectivism. What would you say are the best arguments against objectivism?
So I don't think any of the arguments that kind of you're making on the practical, how does capitalism work, none of them are good arguments. They're no good. I mean, literally, they're no good arguments. and I'm not the best at this. There are economists out there who have answers to every single one of these, because every single one of these arguments have been made. There's no argument in the realm of economics that hasn't been made, and there are answers to all of them, and they're really good answers to them. And a system that adopted freedom. I mean, if you're gonna actually argue against objectivism, you're gonna have to argue at the foundation. You're gonna have to argue what you were implying. So you'd have to argue that, look, people can't resist gambling. It just is. And a significant number of them, and we have to protect them from it. So you have to argue against reason. The only argument against objectivism that has any chance of successful, I still think it's unsuccessful, is to argue that human beings are not capable of being rational, that they're not capable of reason, they're not capable of rationality, or at least, let's say 50% of humanity is not capable of rationality. Some of us are, but 50% is not, and therefore they need to be taken care of in some way. Now, you'd still have to argue why I need to take care of them, and what's in it for me. But you'd have to argue against human reason in order to challenge objectivism. I don't think there's any argument about the economics of it that stands any ground. So
that's why you'd probably agree that you can be paternalistic in relation to small children who are not yet capable of reason.
Absolutely. And look, anybody who's not capable of reason needs to be taken care of. The elderly, in some cases, dementia, which is horrible. I mean, if you got relatives who've lost their mind, I mean, there's nothing worse than seeing somebody who had the capacity to reason lose the capacity to reason, they need to be taken care of. Somebody has to take care of them. And this is hopefully their children take care of them, their neighbors take care of them. Somebody who loved them, who cares about them, will take care of them. But yes, objectivism ultimately boils down to we are a rational animal. We have that capacity, and we should be left free to live that kind of life.
Thank you so much, Yaron. It was
My
a pleasure.
This was fun.
Yeah, we could have had 2 more hours at least debating, but
I've done that.
Yeah.
So one day.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
And to everyone who followed us at home, thank you for being there. Like, comment, subscribe, all that helps. If you're feeling a bit more generous and want to support the project, there's a link in the description. Thank you very much, and see you next time. Thanks, Yaron.
Excellent.
Oh, it was very nice, man. Very fun.
Yeah, that was fun.